You may have heard the slogan, "Red Bull gives you wings." It has been playing on televisions, stadium screens, and internet ads since 1997. It is one of the most recognized advertising taglines in human history, and it worked so well, so deeply, that in 2014, a group of consumers in the United States filed a lawsuit against Red Bull, not because the drink harmed them, because it did not give them wings. They felt genuinely misled. The settlement cost Red Bull $13 million. Think about that for a moment. A slogan was so convincing that a court decided the company owed people compensation for not delivering something physically impossible. Keep that lawsuit in mind. We are coming back to it. Now imagine the slogan was not marketing. Imagine it was a biological fact. Imagine that every can of Red Bull sold anywhere on Earth, from the corner stores of Lagos to the vending machines of Tokyo, to the gas stations of rural Montana, caused a real, physical, irreversible transformation. Wings, actual wings, spanning meters of feather and bone, attached to a human body capable of powered flight. 8 billion people wings at once. What actually happens to the world? Not to one person, not to a single city, to the planet, to its infrastructure, its airspace, its food supply, its ecology, and ultimately its civilization. Because this is not a story about freedom. It turns out the sky is far more complicated than anyone standing on the ground has ever been asked to think about. Let us set the rules of this thought experiment clearly. Every human being on Earth, upon drinking any can of Red Bull, grows functional wings. The transformation is permanent. The wings are biologically real, meaning they obey the physics of actual flight. They require muscle, energy, and metabolic support. And here is where it gets interesting. The creator of this world decided that different Red Bull flavors produce different types of wings. The original Red Bull gives you standard wings, broad and powerful like a golden eagle's. The tropical flavor gives you something closer to a swift's wings, narrow and built for speed. The blueberry variant produces hummingbird-style wings, small, rapid, hovering capable. Coconut gives you something like a barn owl's, broad and nearly silent. Watermelon produces wings modeled on the albatross, enormous span, built for distance gliding with almost no effort. These are not arbitrary. Each maps onto a real aerodynamic strategy that evolution spent millions of years refining. And each carries very different consequences for what happens next. The transformation happens simultaneously, not gradually. One Tuesday morning, across every time zone, in offices and kitchens and school cafeterias and construction sites, anyone who has ever cracked open a Red Bull finds wings erupting from their shoulder blades. Roughly 12.1 billion cans were sold in 2023 alone. Red Bull has been selling since 1987. The number of people affected on day one is effectively the entire adult population of Earth now. What does a human body actually need to fly? Here is the part most people never think about. Birds are not just humans with wings attached. They are completely different engineering solutions to the problem of gravity. A condor, the largest flying bird in the Western Hemisphere, weighs roughly 15 kilograms and has a wingspan of 3.2 meters. Scale that up to a 70-kilogram human, which is close to the global average adult body mass, and the math becomes immediately uncomfortable. Lift scales with wingspan in a complex relationship tied to weight. To generate enough lift for a 70-kilogram human, engineers and biologists estimate the required wingspan is approximately 6.7 meters or about 22 feet. That is wider than a London double-decker bus is long, and that wingspan alone is not enough. The muscles that power flight in birds, the pectoral muscles anchored to an enormous keeled sternum, account for roughly 15% of a bird's total body weight. In modern humans, those same chest muscles account for about 5% of body weight. To fly under muscle power, human bodies would need to be fundamentally restructured overnight. New muscle mass, an enlarged sternum, hollow bones, a completely shifted center of gravity. This is the first thing that goes wrong on day one, not in the sky, on the ground. The transformation is not clean. 8 billion bodies are simultaneously restructuring. Bones are hollowing. The process of bone remodeling in a human skeleton normally takes years. Compressed into minutes or hours, the stress on surrounding tissue, blood vessels, and nerves is catastrophic. Emergency rooms around the world fill within the first hour, not because of flight accidents, because the transformation itself is a medical crisis. The hollow bones required for flight carry a brutal trade-off. They fracture under loads that normal human bones handle easily. Suddenly, 8 billion people have skeletons that are simultaneously more aerodynamic and more fragile than anything human medicine has ever encountered. Every protocol in every hospital on Earth becomes instantly obsolete. X-ray machines, surgical instruments, bone splints, and drug dosages are all calibrated for human bones with normal density. None of them apply anymore, but that is not the dangerous part. The dangerous part begins when people start trying to actually use the wings. Consider the math of human airspace for a moment. Right now, at any given moment, roughly 9,700 commercial aircraft are in the sky globally. Aviation works because those aircraft are tracked, separated by altitude and horizontal distance, traveling on predefined routes, and communicating with air traffic controllers through a global system that took a century to build. The minimum safe horizontal separation between commercial aircraft is 3 nautical miles, or about 5.5 kilometers. The vertical separation is 300 meters. None of that exists for biological flyers. On the first day of the Red Bull world, the low-altitude airspace, the zone between ground level and roughly 600 meters, which is currently used only by small aircraft, drones, and helicopters, becomes the most congested environment in the history of the planet. Not by 9,700 objects, by hundreds of millions of people, all simultaneously learning to control bodies they have never lived in before, in 3 dimensions, with no training, no maps, no rules, and no natural instinct for the physics of their new form. Birds spend months to years learning to fly. Fledglings fall, they miscalculate. They crash into things. They have the advantage of beginning flight at small body sizes, with low inertia and relatively low consequence when something goes wrong. A 70-kilogram adult human traveling at 40 kilometers per hour with a 6-7-meter wingspan does not have that advantage. A mid-air collision between 2 people in this scenario carries the kinetic energy of a car crash. On day 1, the collision rate in low-altitude urban airspace would be unlike anything aviation safety engineers have any framework to model. But here is something counterintuitive. Not everyone immediately takes to the sky. The flavor distribution matters enormously. People who drank the original Red Bull have eagle-type wings, broad, powerful, built for soaring. But soaring requires thermals, rising columns of warm air that allow a bird to gain altitude without flapping. Cities generate huge thermal columns because of the urban heat island effect. Tokyo, New York, Lagos, Shanghai, London, all of these cities are measurably warmer than their surrounding countryside, sometimes by 5 to 10 degrees Celsius. That temperature differential creates real, exploitable thermals. Eagle-wing humans would instinctively, or through rapid experimentation, discover that the best places to fly without exhausting themselves are directly above city centers. So the people best positioned to fly, the ones with the most efficient wings for human-scale soaring, would naturally concentrate above the densest, most populated urban environments. Think about what that actually means. The airspace directly above every major city on Earth becomes simultaneously the most thermally efficient place to fly and the most populated place on the planet. The collision mathematics in that zone are almost impossible to describe. People who drank tropical Red Bull have Swift-type wings. Swifts are extraordinary. They can fly at over 170 kilometers per hour, spend almost their entire lives airborne, and barely land except to breed. Swift-wing humans would immediately become the fastest people in the air. But speed in a congested airspace is not a feature. At 170 kilometers per hour, a human body has almost no reaction time to avoid obstacles. Power lines, buildings, other people. A swift-wing human at full speed in urban airspace is essentially a biological projectile. There are 160 million kilometers of power lines on Earth, strung between poles, suspended across valleys, running along every road in every suburb of every country. Bird strikes on power lines kill tens of millions of birds annually and cause significant damage to infrastructure. Scaling that collision risk to human-sized biological flyers moving at swift speeds produces a different kind of crisis entirely. Power lines do not merely damage you. At high velocity, the cables act as wires stretched across a path. The energy released in a collision can kill instantly and trigger regional power outages. On day one, multiple regions of the global power grid would begin to fail. We will come back to what that means for everyone on the ground. The hummingbird wing people have a different problem. Hummingbirds are metabolic miracles and metabolic nightmares simultaneously. A hummingbird burns calories at roughly 77 times the resting metabolic rate of a human. They survive this because they weigh 3 to 5 grams and live in environments rich with nectar. A human with hummingbird-style wings, capable of hovering and rapid maneuvering but not sustained gliding, would need to generate enormous amounts of energy just to stay stationary in the air. A rough scaling estimate suggests a hovering human might burn upward of 4,000 calories per hour of sustained hover. That is roughly 2 days' worth of normal human caloric intake consumed in 60 minutes. These people cannot fly for long. Not without eating constantly, not without a food supply that does not exist yet. And the albatross wing people? They have drawn what initially looks like the best hand. Albatrosses are the greatest gliders on Earth. They can fly thousands of kilometers on almost no muscular effort by exploiting a technique called dynamic soaring, skimming close to the ocean surface to extract energy from wind gradients. An albatross wing human could theoretically travel intercontinental distances with minimal caloric expenditure as long as they stay over open water or flat terrain with steady winds. Over cities, over forests, over mountains, the technique fails. Urban geometry disrupts the smooth wind gradients required. These people would find themselves extraordinarily capable over oceans and plains and almost helpless over any complex landscape. So within the first 24 hours, humanity has fractured along a new axis. Not nationality or wealth or language. Wing type. Now let us go deeper because the infrastructure consequences are only beginning. There are approximately 1.35 billion cars on the road globally. Roads exist because humans cannot fly. Entire civilizations were built around the assumption that terrestrial locomotion is the only option. Now consider what happens to road traffic when a significant fraction of the global population can travel through the air instead. In dense urban areas with good thermal activity, commuters rapidly discover that flying is faster than driving in most conditions. Road usage in those areas begins to fall, not immediately, not cleanly, but measurably within weeks. Here is the strange secondary effect. Fewer cars on the road means lower demand for road maintenance budgets, which were already underfunded in most countries. Roads begin to deteriorate faster than normal. But the people who cannot fly, those who did not drink Red Bull, those who are injured during transformation, those whose hollow bones make flight medically impossible for them, are now moving through deteriorating road infrastructure while simultaneously sharing that ground-level environment with people who are landing and taking off constantly without any designated zones, without any system. There are no runways for people. There are no air traffic lanes for people. There is no answer to the most basic operational question in all of aviation. How do you safely manage takeoff and landing for 8 billion biological flyers? Birds solve this problem because they are small and light and land individually on branches. A human landing at speed needs significant horizontal distance and clear ground. Every park, every plaza, every open space on Earth becomes an unofficial landing zone. Simultaneously, without coordination, the pedestrian areas that existed as calm Slow-moving public spaces, the piazzas of Rome, the parks of London, the plazas of Mexico City, become dangerous high-traffic approach zones. Cities were not built for this. Their geometry is entirely wrong. Skyscrapers present a different problem. There are over 150 skyscrapers taller than 300 meters currently in the world, and thousands of buildings taller than 100 meters. Glass facades, which dominate modern commercial architecture, are nearly invisible to birds and cause an estimated 600 million bird deaths per year in the United States alone. Human-scale flyers navigating urban canyons at speed, with limited training, poor spatial awareness in 3 dimensions, and no instinctive threat detection system for glass, would reproduce this problem at catastrophic scale. Glass front office towers would become one of the leading causes of injury in any winged human civilization. This is the point in the story where it looks like the problem is purely mechanical. Like humanity just needs to redesign its cities, build new traffic systems, retrain itself, give it a few years, adapt. That is not the full picture, not even close. Let us step back from the city for a moment and look at the sky itself. Right now, the low-altitude airspace, the zone from ground level to 600 meters, is relatively empty by the standards of the natural world. But the natural world maintains its own systems up there: wind dispersal of seeds, pollen, and spores, migration corridors for billions of birds, altitude-specific insect populations, pressure gradients that influence local rainfall. The atmosphere near the surface is not an empty transportation corridor. It is a living system. Introduce 8 billion large biological flyers into that system, and the disruptions are not just mechanical, they are ecological. Every time a bird flies, it moves air. A single bird's wing beat is trivial at the planetary scale. 8 billion humans with 6, 7-meter wingspans flapping simultaneously is not trivial. Atmospheric scientists who study wind turbine interference, urban heat islands, and deforestation effects have documented that large-scale changes in surface roughness and air movement patterns measurably affect local weather. Billions of large biological flyers concentrated in urban airspace would alter the local turbulence structure above cities in ways that are genuinely difficult to model. The thermal columns that eagle-wing humans rely on for soaring would become more chaotic, less predictable, less exploitable, as the sheer volume of winged bodies disrupts the smooth convective flow. Here is where it gets strange. Wind patterns at low altitude are deeply connected to seed dispersal. Roughly 30% of all plant species on Earth rely on wind dispersal for propagation. The turbulence changes introduced by billions of biological flyers would alter where seeds land, which species spread, which ecosystems are seeded, and which are not. Over decades, this would reshape vegetation patterns, not dramatically, not overnight, but measurably, and without any human decision-making behind it. The forests of the future would be different because humans learned to fly. Bird species that currently occupy the low-altitude airspace would face unprecedented competition and collision risk. We have 10 Siouan species of birds on Earth. They evolved over 150 million years to occupy specific ecological niches in the air. Humans entering that airspace with wingspans would immediately displace them from the most thermally active zones above cities. Some species would find entirely new collision pressures from human traffic. Others would lose nesting sites as every building surface becomes a potential perch for a winged human. The ecological pressure on avian biodiversity in the first decade of a winged human world would be severe. And then there is disease transmission. Right now, the primary driver of human-to-human respiratory disease transmission is proximity and shared indoor air. People in confined spaces breathe the same recirculated air. Respiratory pathogens evolved to exploit this. Now introduce a world where enormous numbers of people are moving through shared low-altitude outdoor airspace at close range. Respiratory transmission in outdoor air is normally low risk because wind disperses particles. But birds in tight flocks, which is exactly the density pattern winged humans would create in thermal columns above cities share respiratory space far more intimately than ground-level pedestrian crowds. Airborne pathogens in a world of flock-flying humans would find entirely new transmit vectors that no existing epidemiological model covers. This is the part most people never think about. Wings do not just change transportation, they change epidemiology. Now we have arrived at what feels like the climax: chaos in the airspace, infrastructure collapsing, ecology shifting, disease patterns rewriting. Humanity struggling to adapt to a transformation it received without warning or preparation. Here is where most analyses of this scenario would end. They should not, because we have not yet talked about what happens to the people who can fly the most. Go back to the caloric math. Eagle wing soaring is efficient. An eagle can soar for hours on almost no active muscular effort, exploiting thermals. If humans could access reliable thermals and had the right technique, the caloric cost of eagle-style soaring flight might be manageable at perhaps 80, 0 to 200 calories per hour of active flying and far less during passive soaring. That is expensive, but not impossible. A person eating a high-calorie diet could sustain it. Hummingbird wing flight is catastrophic, 4,000 calories per hour of hover. Nobody can sustain that without constant, enormous food intake. Swift-wing high-speed flight is somewhere in between. The speeds are extraordinary, but the aerodynamic efficiency at those speeds is reasonable. Say 500 to 2,000 calories per hour of active flight. Albatross wing dynamic soaring over open water or flat plains, potentially as low as 400 calories per hour, barely more than brisk walking. Here is what this caloric gradient means for civilization. The ability to fly meaningfully for distance, for duration, for real transport value becomes directly tied to food access. The poorest populations on Earth, those already consuming fewer than 2,000 calories per day, cannot afford the caloric budget of powered flight on top of basic survival needs. They have wings, they cannot use them. Not the way that someone eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day could. The wealthiest nations, those with abundant, cheap, calorie-dense food supplies, the United States, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, would produce populations capable of sustained flight. The nations already experiencing food insecurity across sub-Saharan Africa, parts of South Asia, parts of Latin America, would have populations physiologically capable of short bursts of flight, but metabolically imprisoned near the ground. Read that again. Wings, which feel like the ultimate symbol of freedom, become the most literal expression of inequality in human history. Your ability to leave the ground is directly proportional to your access to food. The sky becomes a class system with physics built into it. The people who can eat can fly. The people who cannot eat are grounded by biology, not by law. And the people who can fly change everything about how power is distributed. Military strategy rewrites overnight. Every defensive perimeter, every border wall, every moat and fence and checkpoint in human history was designed to stop ground-level movement. A border wall is irrelevant if the people it is meant to stop can simply fly over it. The entire architecture of national sovereignty, which is built on the premise that humans move along the ground and can be stopped by physical barriers, collapses. Countries that cannot afford to feed their populations enough to enable flight cannot defend their borders in the conventional sense. Countries with well-fed, flight-capable populations can project power through the air in ways that no existing military doctrine covers. Within a decade, the geopolitical map of the world would look unrecognizable. The sky was the last truly unowned commons on Earth. Not because nobody wanted to own it, because nobody could live in it. A few aircraft, some satellites, weather balloons. The sky belonged to everyone and no one because using it required enormous machinery and expense. Now billions of human bodies are in it daily, and wherever billions of humans go, ownership follows. Airspace rights, already a contested legal area in commercial aviation, would expand downward to street level. The question of who owns the air above your house which is currently theoretical at anything below a few hundred feet, becomes an immediate, violent, practical dispute. Can a winged human legally fly through private airspace 20 meters above someone's backyard? Can a government deny flight corridors to its citizens? Can corporations buy aerial lanes the way they buy roads? These questions have no answers in any existing legal system on Earth. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 declared space the common heritage of mankind. The high seas are international territory. But the low-altitude airspace above your city, that sits in a legal gray zone that was never fully resolved because it was never fully contested. In the winged human world, it would need to be resolved immediately, under conditions of chaos, with no precedent and no international consensus. The first wars fought specifically for airspace ownership would probably begin within 5 years. Lift your perspective for a moment, not to orbit, just to the edge of the atmosphere, where the physics of what we have built becomes visible all at once. 8 billion people began this story on the ground. They drank a beverage, they grew wings, and in the space of a decade, the transformation has rewritten medicine, ecology, food systems, military strategy, property law, disease transmission, city design, road infrastructure, climate patterns, and the very concept of national sovereignty. None of these consequences came from the wings themselves. They came from everything that wings interact with. A wing is just a surface that moves air. But every system on Earth was built around creatures that did not have them. Every hospital, every road, every power line, every border, every epidemiological model, every agricultural system, every legal concept of property and space, all of it assumed that humans stayed on the ground. Change one assumption, break 1 billion-year evolutionary compromise, and every system built on top of that assumption breaks with it. Now remember the 2014 lawsuit, $13 million. Consumers sued Red Bull because the wings never came. The joke at the time was that Red Bull owed you freedom and sent you a coupon instead. It was a punchline, a cultural footnote, a mildly interesting story about the power of advertising. In a world where the slogan was literal, that lawsuit would not be about false advertising. The product liability cases would be about wrongful death from mid-air collisions, about uninformed consent to permanent biological modification, about negligence in flooding an unregulated airspace with billions of untrained flyers, about the company's responsibility for power grid failures caused by swift-wing collisions with high-voltage lines, about the caloric demands of hummingbird wings driving malnutrition in food-insecure populations, about the ecological disruption to bird migration caused by the sudden presence of 8 billion large competitors in low-altitude airspace. The slogan that was once just marketing would become the most consequential product claim in human history. $13 million would look like nothing. The liability would be civilizational. And here is the final thought. The oldest human dream, older than any civilization, older than any written language, is flight. Cave paintings do not show it directly, but the obsession with birds, with the sky, with the creatures that could do what we could not, runs through every mythology ever recorded. Icarus, Hermes, Garuda, the angels of every Abrahamic religion, all winged, all divine, all above us. We built aircraft because we could not get there ourselves. We spent 200 years engineering our way into the sky with machines because evolution never gave us the tool. The slogan tapped into something real, not a desire for a beverage, a desire that is tens of thousands of years old. And this thought experiment reveals something quietly devastating about that desire. We wanted wings. We dreamed of the sky as a place of freedom, of escape, of transcendence. And what the physics tells us, what the biology and the infrastructure and the ecology and the law all agree on, is that the sky filled with us would immediately become just another place we made complicated. New hierarchies, new inequalities, new laws, new wars, new diseases, new ecological damage, and new ways to be poor. The dream was the sky empty of us, looking up at it. The reality would be the sky full of us, looking down at the wreckage, the The question that remains, the one this thought experiment does not resolve, is whether that would stop us from drinking the can. Make sure to subscribe, like, and comment if you liked this video. We post daily, and don't miss out. You can also click one of these videos to continue your binging.